Hi, welcome back. So, the title of this mini lecture is The Mexican-American War, Part 1. So, we're going to talk about 5 terms that you need to know about in order to kind of start to get a sense of this conflict, which is quite complex. Let's get into it. So, the first term for us to understand is Texas. So, after the nation of Mexico gains its independence in the early 1820s, one of the things that you're going to start to see in modern Texas is a movement to separate from the nation of Mexico. Now, that is a whole other process for discussion. It's very long, it's very drawn out. There are any number of battles. You have the migration of any number of individuals from the US who come there who are going to fight very long and drawn out conflicts in order to be able to achieve independence. So there's going to be leaders in that, Sam Houston, of course, fairly famously, there's the battle at the Alamo against Mexican forces, where very famously Davy Crockett is killed, along with many others. Eventually, the process of Texas developing independence is achieved in the aftermath of the Battle of San Jacinto, and eventually by 1845, Texas is annexed by the United States. That brings us to our second point, which is Santa Anna. Now, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna had been a general, had been a president, was a caudillo, was a really, really, really powerful figure in the mid 19th century in the course of Mexican history and across the history of Latin America for a number of reasons. Not only the power base, of course, that he develops for his role as a military commander, the fact, of course, that he's present and is captured at San Jacinto, and then is exiled a number of times, fights in these battles against the French in the 1830s, is severely wounded, then eventually is called back in after the president is removed against the war with the US. And what will happen is in 1846, right, so he's brought back in his capacity as a general. So he's really kind of integral, to kind of understanding Mexican leadership sort of at this time. And there's also stories, of course, about sort of his treatment by the Americans at this time, which isn't very good. There's some stories about his prosthetic leg being captured. There's lots of things there. The third term, excuse me, for us to be thinking about is manifest destiny. Now, manifest destiny was a term that related to American culture and society, as well as dictating political movements in the 1830s and 40s, especially. And the view was that territories and other nations that were held by other peoples and nations were essentially the property and purview of the Americans because of American exceptionalism, right? Essentially that God had essentially favored the Americans and given them the ability to go and to take these places. And so you're going to start to see this really influence efforts at Western expansionism in the United States in the 1830s. And that idea that these areas or territories, or any area or territory, can and should be that of the Americans because of this exceptionalism favored by God, is going to really dictate why the Americans feel that interference in Mexico is essentially in their interests in the 1840s. Now, the fourth term for us to be aware of is the Rio Grande. Now, the Rio Grande, of course, is an incredibly famous and incredibly important river, but it's also really, really important for understanding the beginning of the Mexican-American War. So, Texas declares itself to be an independent republic. 1845, the United States annexes it. Mexico doesn't recognize the independence of Texas, and so troops in early 1846 are going to cross the Rio Grande and they're going to fight with the Americans. And the Americans are going to look at this in the clouded manifest destiny eyes as justification for war, that essentially Mexico is bringing this war on itself, that it's the fault of Mexico, that Mexico is now an existential threat to the United States, and war needs to happen. And so you see the Congress in early 1846 declaring war against the nation of Mexico. Now, there's a lot of conflicted history there, but Congress does declare this. There are those who are opposed to it. But either way, the United States begins a comprehensive war against Mexico in early 1846, where they're going to fight any number of battles in order to be able to capture Mexico City eventually later in 1847. And that brings us to our fifth point, which is Chapultepec. For those who are unfamiliar, Chapultepec is this sort of castle and redoubt outside of Mexico City, which is the site of a battle on September 12th and 13th in 1847. And this is a very big and bloody battle that takes place, which the Americans eventually win as a part of their capturing of Mexico City to eventually force an end to the war and a treaty called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. All right. Thanks so very much.